Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. It's coming on the end of June, and we've been doing quite a bit of running around in the woods, working on some ongoing projects, but also just trying to get back in the flow of being in here at Lookout Command Central, making maps and working on forestry education. So today's episode's about roadless areas, with a focus on northeastern California, Lassen and Plumas National Forests. And this is inspired by a post I saw on Facebook today where LaMalfa, our local rep, is talking about how the Forest Service is going to do away with the Roadless Rule and the Roadless Mapping, which has prevented road construction on large tracts of roadless areas that were last mapped in 2001. And so we're going to kind of take a map tour of that, and we're going to talk about, in his post, he says, setting these areas aside from road building has increased the catastrophic wildfire. It's increased the odds of wildfire. It's taken money away from logging communities, and he had some other comment there. So I kind of want to just go through that because I've been kind of looking at these roadless areas around here my whole career, and so I feel like anytime we're talking about mapping related stuff, it relates to the real world. And so it's good to have real world examples because it's easy to kind of make blanket pronouncements and say, yeah, fire's worse in roadless areas. But if you really want to talk about the specifics, it's good to look at a specific area and talk about the specific history and what's actually happened, because that's how land works, right? The land doesn't really lie. The history's there. So we're going to just kind of use the mapping. That's what we do here on Lookout. So as we get started on that, I want to thank some of our sponsors. Longtime sponsor, we've got QTAC, paired here with a water axe pump. There's two of our current sponsors. QTAC makes slip-in fire pumps, and also they build fire engines, and really good products right here in Chico. We've got a new sponsor here, it's Firebox, and Firebox is building these really kind of cutting-edge attachments for skid steers. You'll be seeing more of Firebox's stuff, but they've got a factory in Anderson. I went up there the other day and shot some video. They're building these really nice tools for firefighting and for prescribed fire. So, thanks to QTAC, Water Axe, and Firebox, and now we'll kind of jump into the maps. Okay, so what are roadless areas? Well, the first thing to talk about when it comes to roadless areas is just how many roads we've got out in a national forest. So here's a map of kind of the area centered on Lake Almanor, and then all the Forest Service roads here are in kind of blue and purple and a little green. So the Forest Service has got like over 100,000 miles of road system in their kind of national system. The Plumas National Forest alone, I think, before they started kind of downgrading some of the roads, they had something like 6,000 miles of road on the Plumas, and the Lassen had something like, between 4,000 and 5,000 miles. So there's a lot of roads out there in the forest. This is Swain Mountain north of Westwood. But there's roads for days. And so this discussion today is about areas that are roadless. And what happened was basically in 1979, there was a big mapping effort called RARE, Roadless Area Review. And the Forest Service was getting pressure for having built so many roads and taken all the big trees off the landscape. And so the roads kind of became, there was some pressure to preserve areas that had not yet been roaded and logged. And so these areas that are in yellow here are basically pretty similar to what was mapped in 79 as being kind of the remaining chunks of land on national forest that hadn't yet kind of been roaded in a large way. So just to kind of set our bearings here, we've got Lake Almanor in the middle. We've got the Feather River. So we've got kind of like some areas of the High Lakes and kind of Chips Creek west of Belden. So here's Belden. There's this kind of really rugged section of the Feather River Canyon that's roadless. Up here we've got the Butte Mountain roadless area, which is, if you're on your way to Chester, it's kind of the mountain that's behind Black Forest Lodge. Going down Highway 32 to Chico through Deer Creek Canyon, kind of from around Deer Creek Falls up to Elam Campground. Everything on the opposite side of the river from Highway 32 is roadless. That's the Cub Creek roadless area. We've got kind of the Polk Springs Roadless area down here, which is, we've got Ishii Wilderness. Looking for my Ishii map. So Ishii's out in here, and then you've got the Polk Springs Roadless area, which is basically kind of Deer Creek watershed. Really remote, rugged area. You've got roadless areas around Mill Creek, coming down kind of below Hole in the Ground campground. Some of the forks of Antelope Creek below Ponderosa Way. Here's Lassen Park Wilderness is in red. And so you've got kind of like area around Heart Lake, around the edge of Lassen, and some areas around the outside of Caribou Wilderness. And then you've got Thousand Lakes Wilderness and some roadless areas up there, and you've got stuff in the Hat Creek Rim. So where some of this stuff starts to get interesting for me is when you look at the terrain. I mean, there's a reason that these areas didn't get roaded. And that reason is, for the most part, that either they were incredibly rugged or they kind of lacked timber and other things that would make you want to build a road. So if you look here around Lassen, at this roadless area on the south end of Lassen, you can see that probably the reason they never built a road there is it's just like lava flow and not much fun and not a lot of timber there. So like no the economics weren't there to like build a road. You weren't going to get enough timber out of there. So a lot of this landscape, this LiDAR imagery we use to look at the terrain, it's pretty awesome for seeing like just what's out there on the naked earth. And the naked earth here is like, makes me want to go check this place out, because there's not much timber and it's rugged AF. And so that's a common thread through these areas that are roadless. Like the road builders were very ambitious in the 50s, 60s, 70s on the Forest Service land. And they tended to build roads everywhere they could. Timber was king. And so they built roads everywhere. But these areas here, kind of like above Child's Meadows on Mount Kennard, there's just a lot of areas here that they just weren't conducive to road building. If you come down here and look at the Cub Creek watershed on the backside of Deer Creek, that's the Cub Creek roadless area. Like, there's just some steep, rugged land. Didn't have enough timber for them to care about. And this Cub Creek area also had some big fires in like the 1870s, 1880s. And so you've got these big brush fields. There's just not very good. There's no great reason here. There wasn't a great reason. The timber wasn't worth enough of the hassle of building a road. And by the time they were done with all the other kind of road building and logging, it still didn't really pencil out. So I think what's interesting about LaMalfa's claim is that he says that setting aside these areas and not managing them has resulted in these kind of catastrophic fire losses. And there have been catastrophic fires in some of these roadless areas, but there have also been kind of the opposite. So this Cub Creek area here burned in 2008 in the Cub Fire. So we had the Cub Fire burned both sides of Deer Creek as the Cub and Onion fires burned both sides of Deer Creek in 2008. And at that time, there were lots of big fires burning all over Northern California. And these fires kind of started after the other fires were really cranking. So this Cub complex didn't get a lot of attention. Fires mainly started on the ridge. And this fire burned for, about 2 weeks. And in the roadless area, this imagery here is actually 2023. You see there's a lot of trees there. But if you look at like 2009, this is the spring. This is a year after the fire burned this whole roadless area in Deer Creek. You can see that it barely killed any of the trees, right? And so the lightning strike started at the top of the hill, and like we have a lot of the time in the summer, fire just kind of, when it starts on top of the hill, it likes to back downhill. And also, we often get like a storm system, a low pressure system, brings our lightning, low pressure, and then we get a bunch of lightning, and then high pressure comes in, and that's our normal summer weather pattern. And high pressure kind of puts a lid on the pot, so to speak, and the smoke packs in and you don't have any wind and things just kind of smolder for a long time. So 2009, Cub Fire. I'd written a fire plan for Deer Creek in 1999, and it was kind of a big question at the time, like, well, what can we do to manage fuels in the roadless area? Because we can't really do mechanical thinning. It's unlikely that we'll be allowed to put prescribed fire in this landscape at this scale, for logistical reasons, but also because you're like looking right up into the Elmore Basin. So you come up 32 and go across on 36, and here's Chester, and like, if you do a big prescribed burn here in Deer Creek, the smoke goes up and it smokes out Chester and no one's happy. So it wasn't really manageable. A lot of these lands just aren't really manageable. So if the idea is that we're going to like build roads into these super steep landscapes to manage them, it's like, well, the reason we didn't do that in the first place, because they're just not practical to manage. You know, road building in the past tend to be like, let's put in some roads. They're designed by the timber operators basically to facilitate hauling off all the big logs. But if you're going to do anything else, it wasn't practical then. It's not really practical now to do, like, say, mechanical thinning on all this super steep ground in a salmon watershed. It's rugged, right? So there's not a real practical way forward to use logging and thinning to manage this landscape. So that's why that's one of the reasons nothing happened between 1999 and 2008 was just there's no practical kind of solution to fuels here besides prescribed fire at the large scale that isn't really what people want. But when you look at the exact same landscape right next door, you've got Rattlesnake Creek here. And Rattlesnake Creek, it's really the same geology, it's the same slopes as Cub Creek, but it was roaded heavily in the 70s and logged using a variety of practices in the 80s. So you had helicopter logging, you had cable logging, and a lot of clear cuts. And then they did a bunch of reforestation out here. And you'll see that the same fire burned both watersheds in 2008. And you seem to see like more severe fire effects here in Rattlesnake Creek than you do in the unlogged watershed. Right there, and it kind of makes sense because you've taken out a lot of the shade. You've created a bunch of uniform kind of aged tree farms. And they left a ton of slash behind in the 1980s and 90s when they logged this area. So the fire that we had here in 2009, it still wasn't catastrophic, but it was more severe fire effects wise than this watershed right next door that also all burned at the same time. And so this argument that somehow that unmanaged land is always going to burn hotter than managed land, it doesn't always play out. And so I think that's one of those assumptions we got to look out for when we talk about land management, is like there's this like graze it, log it, or watch it burn bumper sticker that seems to sum up a lot of people's attitude about land management, and that if you just leave land alone and don't do anything, that it's just going to all be incinerated. But there's a lot more subtlety to the whole issue than that. And so I think this is a decent example here. Another thing that you can see here with the fire effects is that a lot of this burned hot because this was the burnout that they used to contain the fire that was coming this way. And so I don't know if this was like lit with a hell torch or what, but this was, a lot of this fire here was a result of people lighting it on fire. But the tale of the two watersheds here is just that logging had a really heavy impact on this landscape in the 80s and 90s. And it's left a legacy of denser forest with a lot of slash that's not terribly different on the other side of the line, right? And none of this is to say that we shouldn't manage roadless areas. It's just that these roadless areas, following a fire like this in 2008 that gave us good fire effects, like we should have burned it on purpose in 2018, and now it's been 17 years. And there's a lot of dead and down material out here following, 17 years after this kind of moderate severity fire. So if we look at a current satellite image, a lot of those areas that the trees survived, the trees are still there. But there's a lot of dead and down material. There's heavy brush and there's tons of dead and down material. And so if we do want this land to survive as forest, we have to get fire back in there. And we don't want to wait until there's a Dixie fire knocking on the door. So I had a question that came in on my Facebook today talking about Butt Mountain. And Butt Mountain really roasted. This is the roadless area here. So here's Chester. We're kind of looking south. You go out of Chester and heading towards Chico, and go on Highway 36, and you go through here, and this is like Black Forest Lodge, and you drive through all this land that has been salvaged post-Dixie. And Butt Mountain really, we'd say that it got smoked pretty hard. And that's a bummer. You know, I had survey work up in here in 2020 during the pandemic, and I took my kids up here to Carter Meadow, and we hiked out into this area out here. And there were some really cool, like ginormous stands of sugar pine and big old Doug fir. This landscape was set up for a hot fire. You know, no one did anything in here for land management wise for 100 years. And so then the Dixie fire blew into here under really severe conditions. Basically, here's a map of Dixie kind of in the middle of the day when it burned through Butt Mountain. And basically what was going on there is they had fired out all along Humboldt Road here a few days earlier. And the weather was cooperative and the pressure was high, and the fire hung up here for almost a week. And then the weather changed, we got a big wind event, and the Dixie fire went absolutely bananas, and it burned through Butt Mountain. So the question was, would Butt Mountain have burned if it had been road and logged and everything else? Did this area being roadless and unmanaged change the outcome? I can't say that I think it did, in that when you look at kind of roaded versus unroaded, the outcome for Dixie was that all this landscape had high severity fire. So if you turn off this perimeter here and we just look at like these satellite images that were taken after the Dixie fire, like the edge of the fire is kind of through here. And you can see the Butt Mountain, the red is places there's just no greenery left, and green are places there's still some surviving trees. So Butt Mountain has, you know, pretty high severity, big patches of high severity, but it also has a bunch of green trees in the shade, kind of sheltered areas. And then you look at all of this heavily roaded, heavily managed mix of private and public land here out west of Chester that you see when you drive up there. And we look at like the road layer here. And that area torched. All that Collins land torched, SPI's clear-cut land torched, roaded Forest Service land torched. Like we had this huge high severity push that was like, you know, 100,000 acres of high severity fire in a matter of a day and a half. And the fire didn't care if that was roaded or not, right? So this argument that somehow that managed land versus unmanaged land is better, having more roads and more logging is going to save your forest, it's not really the case. And so I think that's one of the issues we have to talk about, honestly, in California, is just that logging, commercial land, across the board, forestry as practiced in California hasn't been panning out from a fire perspective, right? Fire is burning intensely across highly managed landscapes. So if we look at the park fire from last year in Chico Creek, like it totally ripped thousands of acres of land that was extremely actively managed. So if we look here in like Chico Creek, upper Chico Creek, like if you're going to Butte Meadows and you're looking off into Chico Creek, this land had plenty of roads. It's not Forest Service, so you don't see all the roads because SPI's roads aren't in my layer. But like it roasted. And so this whole argument that, hey, we need to manage this land intensively using, you know, commercial, like doing industrial forestry or else it's all going to burn, like that just hasn't really been panning out. Like we've got Butte Creek here that hasn't burned, but then we've got like we got lots of pixels here. Let's see, I've got some imagery here. We're looking at Orville, Lake Orville and the Middle Fork of the Feather. We got 45,000 acres here of industrial timberland, heavily roaded, extremely actively managed, that all roasted in one day during the Bear Fire. Up here around Feather Falls, going up towards LaPorte. And then we talk about the roadless land here. All this roadless land in the Middle Fork of the Feather, you know, it wasn't aligned with the fire the same way that the industrial timberland was, but look at all those green trees. Like in this case, the unroaded land that was not being managed at all, a lot of it underburned. We still have a lot of big green trees down in the depths of the middle fork of the feather. So I think it just goes to show you can't generalize. You can't say that, like, if we don't log it, it's going to burn. Because we have to talk really specifically about specific places. What kind of logging happened? Over here by Greenville, if we come up out of Wolf Creek, a lot of the private timberland here got smoked, but a lot of it also survived. And find my timberland owners here. We've got a lot of the steeper ground in here got thinned with machines before the fire. And so we do have, there are places that forestry, heavy thinning, other things are helping change fire outcomes. But it's not really a binary thing. Yes, you log it. Yes, it survives a fire. It's more like, yes, you log it. Yes, you pile the slash. Yes, you burn the slash. Yes, you come back and prescribe burn it again later. Like, there's just really, if we're going to talk about forestry, and it's not like we can say, yes, you log it, it's good. No, you don't log it, and it's not good. It's all of the above. We have to, forestry in general, not just the Forest Service, not just industry, has to address the fact that all their lands are burning up in fires. And they're working on it. But we need to go beyond the rhetoric and talk about the specifics. Why did this place survive? Why did this place not survive? One thing that's interesting here, like on the Forest Service land in the Moonlight Fire, was that a lot of this area here reburned areas that had burned in the Moonlight Fire before. And a lot of plantations that had been established on private land in Moonlight Fire survive because the foresters are paying heed to the need to change their practices. So if we look at like these plantations in the Moonlight Fire that burned in 2017 and burned again in 2007, burned 14 years later in Dixie, they survived because the foresters were like, hey man, we got to plant these trees way farther apart. We got to thin them earlier before there's as much slash. And so industry is adapting. But I think this whole thing about opening up the roadless areas to logging, it's kind of just a bunch of smoke and mirrors, because the Forest Service right now doesn't have the ability to really do anything, right? Like, honestly. And so it doesn't matter if they have access to the roadless areas or not. They can't get anything done right now. So it's almost like this alarmism, like, oh my God, the Forest Service, like, they're going to give away all the land. They're going to open up all the roadless stuff. And it's like, well, they can't really get anything done at all. So a lot of the stuff is just kind of like, someone said it's butthole smoke, just more kind of hot air. And I thought, well, if I'm jumping on that, does that make me a butthole smoke jumper? Thanks, Tommy Garcia, for the reference. Anyway, let's look a little bit more at our the geography of these roadless lands. Like I said, the common thread here is like they're roadless for a reason. We look at Polk Springs area here down in Deer Creek. Like, this all burned hot in the park fire. This probably would have burned hot no matter what. This area of the park fire was probably going to burn hot whether you had roads there or not, because when the fires were running in this country, it doesn't matter if you have roads or not. Like, this is some really rugged, inaccessible land. So that's our Polk Springs local roadless area. We already talked a little bit about Deer Creek and Antelope Creek out here. The common thread here is just like, yeah, there's no roads because there's no reason to have a road, right? Like, even where you have roads in this country, in the Ishii kind of front country, like if you're in a fire engine, like you're going seriously like 1 mile an hour. The only real effective horse in this country is the only effective vehicle in this country is a horse, right? So continue our tour. Let's just go up and kind of look at the Modoc National Forest. go look around Hat Creek. Like, there's no roads out here because either it's a big lava flat with no timber, or it's a kind of recent volcano. It's like the Ajimawi kind of lava fields. So it kind of doesn't matter, like, if they removed roadless protection from this, like, who's going to build a road through a lava field with no timber on it? That's basically your roadless tour. They built roads everywhere that was practical or not even practical. They built roads everywhere. And so, yeah, a lot of the stuff looks like this. As an aside, because the Forest Service has like a policy that you have to put out every single fire, and a lot of these forests don't have like fire use plans. I heard from someone who said that they actually went out and put out a fire out here on this, like, one of these small little lava islands. That had, the fire that starts here is already 100% contained the minute it starts. But yet we still like fly in like smoke jumpers or hot shots to save this forest that will never be logged from a lightning fire that would like be the only thing that keeps it from actually burning catastrophically because it's overstocked. So anyway, I think it's interesting, that all this stuff got drawn on topo maps like in the 70s, and then that meant that it had some different status, and now we're arguing about it. But when it comes down to it, a lot of it doesn't make a big difference because like fires are going to do what they want to do in these crazy steep country. Like, it's not going to make a difference if you can drive out here. If it takes you 3 hours to drive out here, it's still not going to make a difference on the day that there's a fire burning there, because it's a Feather River Canyon, and we don't have like medium-sized or small fires in the Feather River Canyon. Either you put it out like when it's an acre, or it's going to burn for 30 or 40,000 acres. Anyway, that's some rambling. I kind of wanted to do a live stream here just to kind of make sure that all this stuff was working before we go into fire season. We'll keep talking about this stuff. It's kind of a confusing time with federal forest policy right now because it's just like everything else with the federal government. Everything is so chaotic. We're going into fire season having arguments about whether or not we have enough incident command teams, supporting roles. Everything's crazy everywhere. And so we'll try to cover as much of this as we can, but like my buddy Tommy says, a lot of this is just kind of butthole smoke. People kind of trying to take advantage of the current chaos to get rid of regulations in general. So we'll keep covering all these different aspects of fire and forestry. If you made it this far, you need a lookout hat. Check out our website, lookout.org. And we appreciate your support, appreciate our sponsors, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Thanks.